Your time has been treated like an open door for so long that you stop noticing how often people walk in without knocking. At first, it felt generous, helpful, kind. You told yourself that being available meant being reliable, that accessibility was proof of care, that showing up whenever needed made you valuable. But over time, something subtle started to shift. Your days began to feel fragmented, your attention scattered, your energy drained in ways you couldn't quite explain. And beneath all of it, a quiet resentment started to form. Not loud enough to cause conflict, but persistent enough to exhaust you. This is the availability trap. When you are always accessible, you train the world to treat your time as infinite. Not because people are malicious, but because humans adapt quickly to patterns. What is always available is rarely valued. What requires no intention is taken for granted. The most dangerous part is that this erosion doesn't begin in relationships. It begins inside you. Before others lose respect for your time, you do. There is often an unconscious belief running in the background. If I am accessible, I am worthy. If I respond quickly, stay open, never say no, I will be needed. And being needed feels dangerously close to being loved. But accessibility is not the same as value. When your time has no boundaries, your nervous system never gets to rest. You remain in a constant state of readiness, always waiting for the next request, the next message, the next emotional demand. That state slowly trains your body to stay alert even when nothing is happening. This is how burnout begins. Not from doing too much work, but from never being allowed to fully disengage. And when disengagement feels unsafe, exhaustion becomes normal. Emotional overexposure deepens this problem. When people have constant emotional access to you, it doesn't create intimacy, it creates dependency. You become the container for everyone else's emotions, listening, fixing, absorbing, stabilizing, while quietly abandoning your own inner state. At first, this feels like strength, like emotional maturity, like being the grounded one. But strength that never rests turns into depletion. Your nervous system was not designed to be permanently on. Continuous emotional availability keeps it locked in a reactive loop. There is no integration, no recovery, no recalibration. Just a steady drain that leaves you feeling hollow even when nothing is technically wrong. This is why you can feel tired even on quiet days. Your system never shut down. There is a critical difference between availability and emotional availability. Availability is about logistics, when you can be reached. Emotional availability is about presence, when you can truly show up without losing yourself. When the first is unlimited, the second disappears. And when everyone has access to you, you slowly lose access to yourself. The fear that keeps this pattern alive is rarely fear of exhaustion. It is fear of disappointing others, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being seen as selfish, cold, or uncaring. Weak boundaries often disguise themselves as kindness, but they are usually rooted in anxiety. Anxiety about being excluded. Anxiety about being replaced. Anxiety about no longer being needed. So you say yes when your body says no. You stay reachable when you need space. You answer immediately, even when it costs you peace. And every time you do, you reinforce the belief that your needs are negotiable. Boundaries feel threatening because they risk altering how others perceive you. You imagine rejection, conflict, distance. But boundaries do not push people away. They reveal who was only there because access was unlimited. That revelation is uncomfortable, but it is also clarifying. People who respect you will adjust. People who benefited from your exhaustion will resist. This is where many people retreat, not because boundaries don't work, but because they work too well. They expose the imbalance that was being tolerated. There is a strange myth that availability equals presence. Less access, paradoxically, creates more impact. When you are not always reachable, people pay attention when you are. When your time requires intention, it carries meaning. When you choose when to show up, your presence becomes deliberate instead of habitual. This is not manipulation, it is alignment. There is a psychological difference between being reachable and being present. Reachable means you can be contacted. Present means you are actually there, mentally, emotionally, energetically. Presence requires energy, and energy requires boundaries. Intentional absence is not neglect, it is authority. When you withdraw access strategically, you reclaim your center. You stop orbiting other people's needs and return to your own rhythm. This shift often feels uncomfortable at first because it removes external validation. You are no longer rewarded for availability. You must source your worth internally. This is the identity shift most people avoid. Accessibility is often tied to approval seeking. If your self-worth depends on being useful, needed, or relied upon, reducing access feels like risking your value. But external regulation of self-worth is unstable. It collapses the moment appreciation fades. True self-worth does not require constant proof. When that internal shift happens, saying no stops feeling cruel. It feels clean, natural, honest. You are no longer negotiating your energy for acceptance. You are choosing alignment over approval. And when identity stabilizes, availability recalibrates automatically. Your nervous system feels the difference immediately. Less availability means fewer interruptions, fewer emotional spikes, less cognitive switching. The body finally receives the signal that it is safe to settle. Solitude and space are not isolating, they are regulatory. When external input decreases, internal clarity returns. Thoughts slow, emotions stabilize. Decisions become easier because they are no longer filtered through exhaustion. You stop reacting and start responding. This is not disappearance, it is restoration. You reclaim energy not by adding more self-care, but by subtracting unnecessary access. You stop leaking attention into places that do not replenish you. And with that reclaimed energy, something shifts. You feel more solid, more grounded, less fragmented. Your life improves not because you vanished, but because you became intentional. Intentional availability is the real upgrade. It means choosing when, how, and to whom you give access. It means being fully present where you choose to be, rather than partially present everywhere. This is not about cutting people off. It is about protecting your nervous system so that when you do show up, you are actually there. You are not becoming distant. You are becoming deliberate. And that deliberateness changes how others relate to you. Some will step closer with respect. Others will drift away when access is no longer effortless. Both outcomes are information. This is not a rule. It is an invitation. An invitation to stop being endlessly accessible and start being intentionally present. To recognize that your time is not unlimited and neither is your energy. To understand that your life doesn't improve when you give more. It improves when you give wisely. Because when you choose where your energy belongs, your life reorganizes around that choice. And for the first time in a long time, you can feel yourself again. There is another layer to this shift that most people only notice after they've already begun pulling back. It's the moment you realize that being less accessible doesn't make you colder. It makes you clearer. Your words land differently. Your silence carries meaning. Your presence feels anchored instead of scattered. This is when you start to understand how much of your life was being shaped by interruption. Every message, every call, every emotional demand was pulling you out of your own rhythm and into someone else's. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but repeatedly. Over time, that constant redirection trained your mind to stay externally oriented. You became excellent at responding, adjusting, accommodating, and terrible at listening to your own internal signals. That's the hidden cost of over-accessibility. You lose your internal reference point. When you begin limiting access, the first thing that surfaces is discomfort. Silence feels loud. Space feels unfamiliar. You may even feel guilty, as if you're doing something wrong simply by not being immediately available. That guilt is not a sign of misalignment. It's a withdrawal symptom. Your system was conditioned to equate availability with safety. So when you remove that pattern, the nervous system initially panics. It looks for something to respond to, someone to tend to, a problem to solve. And when nothing appears, it interprets the stillness as danger. But if you stay with that stillness, something recalibrates. You begin to feel yourself again. Not the version of you that's constantly reacting, but the version that exists underneath obligation. Thoughts slow down. Emotional reactions soften. You notice how much mental noise was coming from external input, not internal truth. This is the nervous system reset that no amount of productivity hacks or self-care routines can replicate. When availability decreases, regulation increases. Your body finally receives the signal that it doesn't have to be alert all the time, that it can rest without missing something crucial, that your worth is not dependent on responsiveness. And with that signal, energy starts returning in a different form, steadier, quieter, more usable. You stop waking up already tired. You stop feeling depleted by conversations that used to drain you. You stop carrying emotional residue that was never yours to begin with. Clarity follows naturally. Not the kind of clarity that comes from thinking harder, but the kind that comes from having fewer inputs to process. Decisions feel simpler because you're no longer factoring in everyone else's expectations. You start asking yourself a different question before saying yes. Do I actually have the capacity for this? Capacity becomes the new filter, not obligation. This changes your relationships in subtle but profound ways. When access is no longer automatic, people have to be intentional. They think before reaching out. They respect timing. They engage more honestly because the interaction now has weight. Some relationships deepen in this space. Others fade. Both outcomes are truthful. Reduced accessibility doesn't destroy connection. It exposes its foundation. Connections built on mutual respect adapt. Connections built on convenience collapse. That collapse can feel like loss, but it's actually correction. You're not losing people. You're losing dynamics that required you to be endlessly available. This is also where your sense of authority returns. Authority doesn't come from dominance or control. It comes from self-regulation, from being anchored enough that you don't need constant engagement to feel relevant. When you choose when to show up, you're no longer at the mercy of demand. Your yes becomes meaningful because it costs something. Your no becomes clean because it's not reactive. And over time, people begin to feel that difference. They may not articulate it, but they respond to it. Your presence carries more weight because it's not diluted across every request, every crisis, every emotional pull. This is why less access creates more impact, not because you're withholding, but because you're concentrated. Concentration is power. There is also a deeper internal shift that happens when you stop being endlessly accessible. You stop outsourcing your sense of importance. When no one is constantly pulling at you, you're forced to sit with yourself without the buffer of usefulness. And in that space, you either confront emptiness or discover fullness. Most people fear this moment because it threatens an identity built around being needed. If you're not needed, who are you? This question is uncomfortable but essential, because an identity built on accessibility is fragile. It depends on external demand. When demand fluctuates, so does your sense of worth. That instability is exhausting. When you stop tying your value to availability, self-worth begins to internalize. You no longer need permission to rest. You no longer need justification to pull back. You no longer feel obligated to explain your boundaries in detail. No becomes a complete sentence. And interestingly, the world doesn't collapse when you say it. Life continues. People adjust. Some disappear. Others step up with respect. And you realize that the catastrophic outcomes your mind predicted were exaggerated. That realization is liberating. It teaches your nervous system that limits are safe, that space does not equal abandonment, that presence does not require constant access. Once the system learns this, it stops bracing. You feel calmer, not because life is easier, but because you're no longer overextended. This calm changes how you move through the world. You respond slower, but more accurately. You listen deeper, but less often. You give support without self-erasure. And when you do choose to be available, it's intentional. You're there fully, not half distracted, not resentful, not depleted. That kind of presence is rare and felt. This is the difference between disappearing and protecting your energy. Disappearing is avoidance. Protecting your energy is responsibility. Responsibility to your nervous system. Responsibility to your long-term clarity. Responsibility to the life you're trying to build. You can't build anything meaningful while constantly fragmenting your attention. Depth requires space. Direction requires silence. Stability requires boundaries. This isn't about becoming unreachable. It's about becoming deliberate. Deliberate with your time. Deliberate with your emotional investment. Deliberate with who gets access to your inner world. When you live this way, something subtle but powerful happens. Your life starts to feel like it belongs to you again. Not because you took it back aggressively, but because you stopped giving it away automatically. And in that reclaiming, there is relief. Not the relief of escape, the relief of alignment. You realize that your life improves not when you give more, but when you give with intention. When your energy is no longer scattered, but placed where it actually matters. This is not a rule to follow. It's an invitation to experiment, to notice how it feels to pause before responding, to let messages wait, to allow space without filling it with justification, and to observe what shifts when your time stops being unlimited. Because when you choose where your energy belongs, your relationships reorganize, your nervous system stabilizes, and your sense of self strengthens. You don't become less caring. You become more whole. And wholeness is far more powerful than endless accessibility ever was.